Molt bon dia a totes i a tots. Buenos días a todas y a todos. Buenos días a todo el mundo. Good morning to everybody. Thank you very much to be here this morning, and thanks also to be part of this open ceremony. It's a pleasure for us, on behalf of the University of Barcelona, to have the opportunity to host a so important scientific activity, especially focused in the brain. So, to start this open ceremony, it's a pleasure, it's an honor for us to pass the floor to Júlia Miralles, Delegate of Science and University of the City Council of Barcelona. Júlia.
Thank you very much, Rector, and thanks to all of you for being here today and for inviting the City Council to do this short welcome speech. I just would like to explain you a little bit what are we doing from the City Council in terms of science and universities. I'm the delegate for science and universities of the Barcelona City Council, and thus this means that the Barcelona City Council have a specific strategy of science and university policy. So it's a pleasure to be here with you, to be collaborating with the Universitat de Barcelona and with so many research centers and researchers like all of you. We are trying to boost Barcelona like a city of science, which already is, but we are trying to consolidate it and to make it grow internationally. So we are working in different kinds of aspects. For example, we have activities of culture. We'll have in next February the Biennial for City and Science, the third edition of the Biennial. We have also works with schools. We have the Escolab, which maybe some of you have been working on. These are visits and meetings between researchers, scientists, and young people from schools in Barcelona to make them know and love science and research. Then we have also the work with universities, which, for example, exists in the Municipal Advisory Council of Universities, where we find a lot of you with ideas, and we meet to exchange ideas and new projects of universities. And finally, we have projects like the one that we are here today welcoming in this moment. So basically we have calls for grants for different kinds of activities of science and research in the city. And for example, this Congress won one of the awards of last year. So just to explain you a little bit, what are we doing on science? Why do we love to have events like this in the city? And thank you very much for being here today, for inviting us, and for keep making growing Barcelona as a city of science. Thank you.
Thank you, Júlia. Thank you very much. And now is the moment to pass the floor to the Dean of our Faculty of Medicine and Health Science, Antoni Trilla.
Bon dia, buenos días, good morning. Welcome to the School of Medicine and Health Science of the University of Barcelona. We are nearly 250 years old. In 1906, the school moved to this current site, the historical building, where together with the hospital clinic, which is surrounding us, makes up the clinic campus. Today, the medical school has 3 campuses, a clinic, Bellvitge, and Sant Joan de Déu, and offers 6 bachelor's degrees, medicine, nursing, dentistry, podiatry, biomedical science, and biomedical engineering. The medical school includes 4 university hospitals, 11 partner hospitals, 22 primary care centers, and other healthcare facilities for teaching and doing research. We are also active partners of several highly regarded biomedical research structures, including the August Pi Sunyer, the IDIBAPS Institute, the Bellvitge Biomedical Research Institute, the IDIVELL, the Josep Carreras Research Institute, the Barcelona Institute for Global Health, IS Global, and the University of Barcelona Institute of Neuroscience, which is the host of this international Multi-Brain Barcelona Congress. We try to do top-quality translational research, hoping that the results will benefit the patients. And as members of a public institution, we have important responsibilities and duties to our society. Our teaching and research programs must create the kind of graduates that our society needs in the different healthcare professions, including research. That's a real challenge for any school of medicine and health science. We want to train good people who become outstanding, dedicated, and honorable professionals. We must be open to our society, listening carefully to what the people and the patients around us have to say, allowing them to take part in our hopes, in our problems, and our projects. We need more now than ever a more global, sensible, and supportive vision of the world and about the health of the world. And neuroscience and the brain are really important subjects. That's the main reason you are all here today, as well as the next few days. Last week, I'm quite sure you are all aware of that, a special issue of Science Journal highlights our understanding of the brain's complex connectivity. The human brain has nearly 86 billion neurons, each one up to 10,000 synapses, forming a vast interconnected network that underlies behavior and cognition. It's really, like the same journal said, like a wonderful symphonic orchestra. And you all are the top music players. You are the Lang Langs, the Yo-Yo Mas, the Daniel Barenboims of the Brain Research Orchestra, performing and conducting at the highest possible level. We thank you for your willingness, your dedication, and efforts. We thank you for sharing your knowledge and ideas, and we thank you very much for being here in Barcelona. On behalf of the University of Barcelona School of Medicine and Health Science, I wish you Godspeed.
Thanks so much, Antoni, Dean. And now is the moment to pass the floor to the director of our Neuroscience Institute of the University of Barcelona, and it's a pleasure and honor to pass the floor to Dr. Alberch.
Okay. Thank you, Rector, degà, delegada de Ciència i Universitats de l'Ajuntament de Barcelona, professors and researchers. Thank you very much to be here in our meeting of the Institute of Neuroscience of the University of Barcelona. And the topic of this meeting represents the personality or the nature of our institute, the multi-brain, because we are studying the brain in all different levels, from the molecular and cellular approaches to behavior and cognition in what we call the three brains, the healthy, pathological, and artificial brains. The study of the brain must be multidisciplinary, and this is what we want to show in the different sessions of this meeting, and I am very happy with the top levels of our speakers, and thank you very much for coming. In this meeting, we will have also a very interesting session with several speakers of neurotech companies that I am sure that we will enjoy with the new technologies applied to brain research, and also to see the interaction between academia and industry, that I think that this is very important for our institute, but because we need to work together to bring knowledge to the society needs. Thank you very much for all the companies that are involved in this meeting, and we have to do more collaboration between us. But I want to tell you that this meeting is because of this logo that you see here. This is the Maria Maeztu Unit of Excellence. The Institute was recognized 4 years ago with the Spanish Ministry of Science and Innovation as Unit of Excellence Maria de Maeztu. This program of the Ministry wants to recognize the best research institutes in Spain in all disciplines, in physics, economy, philosophy, and of course in neuroscience. There are only 2 neuroscience institutes with this award, in Alicante and ourselves. In total, there are only about 50, 60 centers with this award. So you see that this is really, really very competitive. We wanted to do this meeting in the middle of this 4-year period that was in the 2020. So we couldn't make it because of the pandemic. And now we are doing this meeting, but this is at the end of the program. Last week, this program was over. But 2 days ago, we got a great news from the ministry that gave the resolution of the new call and with the new institutes with this recognition. And the Institute of Neuroscience got again. So last week we were out, and now we are in again in the program. And really, I am very, very happy and proud of all the researchers of our institute, because thanks to them and with your excellent work, we got again this award that will be for 4 years and the rector is one of the researchers of, of our institute. So and we think that this is a meeting that we can celebrate this success of the institute. So this will be a meeting and also a party that we can celebrate this new award that we have a lot of work for the next 4 years. Finally, I want to thank all our sponsors that make this meeting possible, mainly the City Council that is always helping us in different activities that we are doing during the last years, and thank you very much. And also there are different societies, scientific societies, patients associations are also involved in this meeting, and also the companies. So all the people that are involved we think that is one of the best challenges that we can have is to understand the human brain and its pathology. But also I want to make a special thanks to the UBneuro staff, Cristina, Katia, and Marta, that make this meeting possible, and also for the hard work in the Institute during these years, and also is because we got this Maria de Maeztu Unit of Excellence Award is their fault too. They did a wonderful work, and it's very nice to work with them, mainly for their enthusiasm in the new challenges that are showing up. And now, in fact, we have a new challenge that will start next week. Okay, so thank you very much for coming, and I hope that you will enjoy this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordi, and only a few words to end this open ceremony. And thank you, Júlia, to be here with us today. So for us, it's a very important day. And thank you to the Dean of our faculty, obviously, to the Director, and especially to you that all the Congress are a reality in relation to the presence of the very high scientific people and to give your work and your efforts to build a new reality in terms of the knowledge of the brain. So I want to highlight only two very simple ideas, but I think that it's very important. In fact, it's important for the University of Barcelona. So we have the sensation to have very involved with our institute, obviously. But the first idea is the brain is the best example now of how we can interpret the research, actually. So the brain is the best transdisciplinary topic in this moment. So only the name of the Congress is a very simple idea to recognize the multiple approaches to the study to the brain, healthy, pathological, and artificial brain. So neurologists, psychologists, biologists, physics, engineering, all involved in an only object of attention, the brain. So in this moment, when we are building the European research area, jointly with the rest of the actors of the scenario in the most interesting research activity in Europe, the brain represents the best topic to identify the transversality of the science. But the second idea is most exciting for me as a researcher in the brain. So the brain represents also the most exciting window to the future. So our knowledge in relation to the brain functioning is the best answer to the very important questions. So in my opinion, the brain is the answer to the challenges of the science in this moment. So if you join these two ideas at the same time, the result of this equation is very simple. This Congress is a very successful, a very important event. So enjoy the work. Thanks for your effort. Thanks for to be part of this important Congress, for this important event for us. And if the timetable it's so easy to follow, please enjoy the Congress, obviously, and also enjoy the city, and obviously enjoy the University of Barcelona. And thank you very much again for to be part of this event, and enjoy it. Thank you and good day.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm David Bartrés, a professor at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences. Welcome to all of you. I'm really excited to now start the scientific sessions of this two-day conference. First of all, I would like to thank the organization, the University of Barcelona, the faculty and the Institute of Neuroscience in particularly, for putting together this fantastic and innovative agenda, I think, which includes top field researchers in combination with technology and biotechs in a very, I think, clear and unique translational approach. So I think that we will be very happy and will enjoy very much the contents of our talks. I'd like to thank you in particular, Dr. Silvia Ginés as the chair of the conference, and Dr. Alberch, and also the work of my colleagues at the executive committee of the Institute of Neuroscience, in particular also Katia, Cristina, and Marta, for taking care of all the of putting all together and bringing the invited speakers and taking care of them. Thank you very much. So, when in the executive committee of the Institute of Neuroscience, we were thinking who to invite, who would be the profile for this plenary talk, we thought that it would be perfect to have some researcher with, that had led research across different fields, with, including basic science, clinical science, but also employing technology developments and, if possible, leading the results to the market, which is quite a lot of things. But I think that we conveyed that we're very happy to invite Professor Michael Valenzuela, which I'm very happy to welcome. Thank you, Michael, for coming, because I think that he really has this profile, and we'll be really looking forward to hear his view in the context of the conference. So, Professor Michael Valenzuela was trained in psychology at the New University of South Wales in Australia, and he also completed medical school education. He's a highly renowned and very internationally acknowledged scientist in the field of cognitive reserve and brain resilience, and in the prevention of dementia in general. And he has led research in this field using both at the preclinical level with animal models and bring this to clinical studies with humans using assessing cognitive status and using MRI. And then he's also developed technological medical advances, in particular in the field of remote and computerized cognitive training and rehabilitation. And for this work, he is also highly cited researcher scientist in the world. He's a critical thinker and an opinion leader, I think. He has, in my view, he always had a very advanced vision. And for that, I think that this explains the reason that he is also advisor of main international organizations, such as the Clinical Consortium of Healthy Aging of the World Health Organization, amongst other organizations. Professor Valenzuela has also shown a very clear translational profile very early on his career, and he has tried to bring what we know from the laboratory to the market. And like this, he has been co-founder of several biotech companies, including in particular Skin to Neuron, which we probably will discuss today. So I always thought that Michael was a step forward of the others working in this field. For instance, when we were still analyzing associations between cognitive stimulation activities and brain atrophy, he was already developing cognitive training, computerized techniques, and when we were thinking about how to train people, he was already transferring this to technological developments to be applied and to try to solve important problems for the society, like dementia prevention. So with all of this, thank you very much, Michael, for coming and accepting our invitation on behalf of the Institute of Neuroscience. Thank you. So we'll have, sorry. Just 1 second. Just 45 minutes more. Yeah, after Michael's talk, we'll have around 15 minutes of discussion and with the people audience here. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, David. Es un honor y un placer estar aquí. And the rest of the talk is going to be in English, I'm afraid. And I'm very glad about that. The title of my talk is Translation of Neuroscience Outside of Academia. So right now we're sitting in the heart of academia in Spain and in Europe. And so this is really a personal view, and it's very much a reflection of my experience throughout the career in terms of the challenges of translation. It's a simple word, but very difficult to do. And so I'm going to present my view in really three phases. The first phase, I'm going to talk about this spin-out biotech company, Skin to Neuron, which is a company I co-founded 2 or 3 years ago. I'll tell you a bit of the journey of how do you move a concept, which was a wet lab concept, into a company which is trying to do the first clinical trial of its kind. So that in itself is a form of translation. So that'll be about the first third of the talk. The second part, I'm going to shift gears and talk about what David mentioned, which is around cognitive reserve, and some research that we've done exploring a new vocal biomarker of cognitive reserve, which I think is very interesting. So that's kind of more basic science, and I'm sure you'll find of interest. And then the last third part is that biomarker emerged out of a very large clinical trial that is now complete in Australia called the Maintain Your Brain trial. And I'll be sharing with you our results for the first time of that very large trial. It's very exciting data. And end on the translational question, now that we have this positive result that I'll explain, what are we going to do with it? Which is always the key question in any translational activity, is what's the point? So let's start with Skin to Neuron. Skin to Neuron is a new biotech company in Australia, based in Sydney. Its origins come from a basic science discovery from me and my group at the University of Sydney. And to move on, the essence of Skin to Neuron, the proposition, is treating Alzheimer's in a whole new way. And instead of attacking the disease process, which is on the right-hand side, which there are hundreds of different studies happening now trying to address disease modification. What Skin to Neuron is trying to do is address the key biological deficit, which is loss of brain cells and loss of synapses, which is what ends up manifesting as network dysfunction and therefore cognitive dysfunction. So what we're trying to address is that loss of neurons. So we're trying to develop a new class of therapy, which is called neurorestorative therapy. So in order to replace those brain cells, where do they come from? So the field is mainly at the moment looking at what are called induced pluripotential stem cells, so very primitive stem cells that originate from a genetic modification of adult cells. Our technology is completely different, and what it relies upon is a gift of nature, a gift of biology, which is that the brain and the skin both emerge from the ectoderm in the developing embryo. So the ectoderm, the embryo is this ball of cells, and the very middle endoderm ends up developing as the lining of different organs. The mesoderm ends up creating a lot of the internal organs of the body. And it's this outer layer of the embryo which ends up becoming one of two things, skin or brain. And so we now know that you can extract brain stem cells, and if you transplant them under the skin, they will become tufts of hair. And we know that if you extract skin stem cells and transplant them into the brain, they become neurons and glia and oligodendrocytes. So the stem cells in these two organs have a memory that they could have been the other organ under different conditions, different embryological conditions. So in the hair follicle, so this is a cartoon of the hair follicle, you can see in the green in the middle of the hair follicle are what's called bulge hair follicle stem cells. We've known about these for about 2 decades now. Those bulge hair follicle stem cells are multipotent, meaning they can become those 3 lineages, endoderm, mesoderm, ectoderm. So they're very interesting from a basic science point of view, as are induced pluripotent cells, very interesting from a basic science point of view, but very difficult to control for therapeutic purposes, because when we transplant a cell in the brain, we just want it to become something predictable, not have the potential to become anything. And so what I discovered, and now S2N owns the intellectual property, is that there is not a bulge stem cell, another much rarer precursor cell in the hair follicle that can only become neurons. So it has this latent memory that in embryogenesis it could have gone down the other pathway to become brain cells. And so this is what we call hair follicle-derived neuroprecursors. This originated as a piece of skin from the back of my head, and we extract out the hair follicles. We use our proprietary technology to generate these cells, HFNs, or hair follicle-derived neuroprecursors. So that is the heart of the skin-to-neuron technology, the manufacture process, the method. This is what our patent structure is around protecting that intellectual property. So when you transplant these cells, this beautiful image shows just one of the transplanted cells in the rodent hippocampus. So those red cells are the cell bodies in the pyramidal layer of CA1 of the hippocampus. And this just highlighting one of the donor cells, which was a hair follicle in its previous life, now differentiating into a gorgeous-looking pyramidal cell in situ. And we went to the extent of doing electrophysiology on this cell and other cells like it, and showing that it's synaptically connected to the host. So the donor cells not only mature and develop into appropriate-looking neurons, but those donor cells synaptically connect to the host brain so that they integrate into the circuit. And if you were to zoom in on one of these dendrites, you would see that the dendrite is fully covered with these beautiful looking dendritic spines, which is where the synaptic communication happens. At the same time, when you study the memory and cognitive outcomes in these rodents, you will see that their previous memory deficits are normalized. So at the same time that the cells are engrafting, you start to see memory function return. So that was the kind of the background pre-clinical studies that I conducted in academia. Then I started a very difficult, ambitious, and maybe even crazy veterinary trial where we were really asking the question, this looks very interesting in rodents, but could it really work in a human? And as you may know, when it comes to Alzheimer's, there's a very big difference between results that occur in mice versus results that occur in humans. And so I was on the search for a translational model that could predict the results in humans before we went to humans. And that's when, more than 10 years ago, by chance, I became aware of a syndrome in dogs, in old dogs, in people's old pet dogs, which seemed very similar to dementia. And so part of my group's effort and study went down that rabbit warren of science, and we end up characterizing the nature of those cognitive deficits, the brain changes that you see in these dogs, some of the genetic changes or markers that you see in these dogs, as well as the pathology. And to cut a very long story short, at every level of investigation, the results in the dogs were essentially the same as in humans. So this is a very deep natural model of both the Alzheimer process and the dementing syndrome. So that's quite unique in terms of an animal model. And so what the proposition was here was, let's start with a doggy patient, a canine patient with a dementia syndrome. We extracted a small skin sample from the patient. We grew these cells in the lab, and then we transplanted the cells directly into that same patient's hippocampus. So that's what you see on the left-hand side. The neurosurgeon is Dr. Erica Jacobson doing the surgery, assisted by Dr. David Simpson, a veterinary surgeon, and myself fiddling around under there, trying to adjust the position of the dog to achieve perfect stereotactic positioning. So this was a 10-year study. We treated 8 dogs in total. 6 came to primary outcome, and the results were extraordinarily successful. I'm going to play you a movie of one of these dogs that you just saw.
So before we had the stem cell implant, he was getting progressively more and more aggressive with basically everyone, and he was erratically aggressive. You couldn't predict what he'd do and when. You might say, hey Leo, let's go for a walk, and all of a sudden he'd turn on you. We were at the stage where sometimes we're almost defending ourselves with a broom, because he'd start, growling at us and chasing after us. And it got progressively worse and worse. And by January, I was thinking, look, we're not going to last. We're just going to have to get him put down. It's just too dangerous. I've got 5 children. I just can't take this risk. Snarling and growling and quite ready to bite. Really weird. So the first few weeks after it, he was sort of recovering, and, he couldn't really tell anything because, still acting different, but, what was the post-operative trauma. But by like 6 weeks, it started to noticeable improvement, and then it was just a gradual thing. And so I guess, when did we have to go? End of February? By mid-April, I was thinking, wow, we've got Leo back. He was just a different dog. And it's now hard, if I look at the old videos, to go, wow, his history is that bad.
So an amazing result, and not atypical. So we've now published very recently that whole trial, and if you're interested, I recommend the paper to you. An amazing outcome, because we achieved what we wanted clinically, which was reversion of the dementia syndrome. The majority of the animals no longer met clinical criteria. And in fact, that benefit lasted for, on average, 2 years until the dogs just got too old. So they died of natural causes as opposed to the dementia syndrome. And then when we look in the brain post that natural death, what we saw in the hippocampus was that that area was full of baby or immature neurons. So in green is a beta-tubulin marker, which is only an early neuronal marker, which you don't see at all in an older dog brain that has the syndrome. And those immature neurons are full of synaptic connections. So we saw 5 or 6-fold increases in synaptic density only in the hippocampus where those cells were transplanted. So this study, I was in the middle of this study, is when I met Mr. Bill Manos. So he's my business partner in Skin2N. And he's truly the angel when it comes to angel investor. He was someone that walked through my lab doors as a possible philanthropist. We got talking. He said, Michael, how much money do you need? I made up a number. He said, I could write you a check right now for that many millions of dollars, but I won't. Because what you need more than money is someone to show you how to create a company and take this to clinical trial. And I was a professor of medicine, and someone was telling me I didn't know my own business, so I thought that was quite challenging. But he was 100% correct. I didn't even know what I didn't know back then in terms of what was required to get an advanced medical product to clinical trial. And so we spun out a company. He initially capitalised that company. And then we subsequently fully spun out. So in other words, the university sold the IP to the company, and I moved essentially full-time to leading and running this company. And so that process of moving from academic mode of research to a biotech mode of research has been probably the most rewarding part of my career. And one, from a financial perspective, what you see is that for something to progress, it changes hands from one type of investor, like Bill, to the next type of investor, which are the venture capital companies that specialise in biotech investment. And what I've learnt over the last 2 years is that there's VCs and there's VCs. And what we are doing is very early stage, very high risk research of moving from preclinical to first-in-human clinical trial. So straight away you can eliminate 80% of venture capital, because that's not the risk profile that they are interested. So it really took at least 12 months for me and the company to understand who in the world are the right VCs, venture capital investors, that are interested in this type of research. And so that process of finding the right type of investor is critical to that translational step, and something that you're never taught or even understand when you're sitting in the lab doing the experiment that you think is required next. The next slide there shows a podcast series that I highly recommend if you think that maybe you're interested in startup culture, spin out a company, create a new company out of your research. I wish I had listened to this podcast when I started as opposed to more recently, because it is so entertaining, it's so funny, and essentially what it is, it's the founder of this company, podcast company, recording himself spinning out the concept of starting a podcast company. And so you hear his first pitch to an investor, external investor, and it is excruciatingly embarrassing how bad that first pitch is. And I remember my own first pitch, and I can't believe that, I said those words or presented that data. So it's a really good, strong piece of advice is go watch this or hear this, because it's very entertaining and you will learn a lot about the generic process of spinning out a company. There are so many lessons to be learnt there. And really the two main messages are you've got to get out there and practice pitching. So you need to pitch to your partner, pitch to your friends, pitch to your family, anyone who will listen before you pitch to an actual investor with actual money, because you will then fine-tune your performance and you will start to hear these questions that everyone keeps asking, and you'll have a good answer at hand. So pitch, 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 and network, network, network. It's really about finding those aligned people, finding your Bill Manos that's right for you, and then finding your right next VC and so forth. And the only way you do that is by meeting and talking to people. I thought it would be useful also to really kind of give a sense of what are the mechanics of creating a company. So everything's been theoretical until now. One of the key pieces or tools that you need is the slide deck. Everyone wants to see your slide deck. And there'll be a confidential one that you get to later, but you first need your non-confidential slide deck that you're happy for people to share. And the details are not important, but in general, the slide deck will have these different aspects. A summary, what's the big opportunity for the investor? How does your science or technology work in simple language? What's the plan from getting from where you are to where you want to go? The team, investors are so obsessed with the team, not your scientific team. If you're talking to an investor, they're assuming you are the scientific expert They're not going to question your science. What they are going to question is, who is your business partner who's done this before, that understands the business side of a company, of running an actual startup company. And then they want to know how much money you want and for what for. And the more big names, people they will have heard of that are in your team, the better. So that's the slide deck. The other very interesting, I guess, asset that you need is the data room. So when negotiations progress and people are actually thinking of actually giving your company money, a process is started which is called due diligence. And so essentially, every dot point in your slide deck needs evidence. It's no longer taken at face value. And so you need to create or curate an online folder with lots of files that's in some sensible order so that they can systematically look the science, this is the data, the business, the team, blah, 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 blah. And what I show there is that is, I can't read it, but I think 600 plus files and a gigabyte or so of data. So this really takes time, and you really need to understand your project. And when I was creating this, I was thinking, when I was preparing the biggest grant of my career, maybe I spent 6 months at the most, not full-time, obviously. So maybe 2 months full-time if you put it all together, and maybe it was 100 pages max. This is 600 files, over a gigabyte of data that needs to be put together, and then people will take you seriously to start talking about, important amounts of financial funding. So it's quite a different, I would say, emphasis on the planning. There's a saying in the biotech world is that for every 1 year your project will run for, so our clinical trial from today till end is 4 years, you need 3 months of planning. So that's 1 full year of just planning your project so that you've really thought about every step. How are you going to get from this step to the next step? What are the different decision-making pathways? I think it's a lot more rigorous than we're used to in the academic world. So that's the skin to neuron story. Now we're going to change gear and talk about the cognitive reserve, the biomarker, and how we got there. So when I finished my PhD, I was lucky enough to win an award which is called the Eureka Prize. One of the more prestigious in Australia. And there was an opportunity to, and my PhD, was, as David mentioned, was very much around dementia prevention, healthy brain. And so there was an opportunity to use a bit of the media profile that I had gained through the prize to write a popular book for the public about what is a healthy brain, what are the main messages, what's some of the science behind that. And the offer was actually given to me by a publisher. They thought it would be a great idea. I talked to my academic colleagues and I went, no, Michael, no. Focus on your experiment. You don't want to be, wasting your time writing a popular science book. Maybe my most successful paper's been cited 1,000 times. That and its offshoots have been read hundreds of thousands of times. So you think about the differential impact of communicating your science well versus communicating to your colleagues. The public is desperate for credible, high-quality communications of your science. And who is better to do that than you, than yourself? It's not for everyone, but I think everyone should think about it because at the end of the day, public science is funded by the public. They need to engage with your activities. And so things like this kind of public outreach, I think, are very important. That kind of spun out into an app which was called Brainiup, which was incredibly popular in Australia. And I think it went to other countries, maybe even here in Spain. And essentially it was trying to gamify this idea of getting points to do good things for your brain. And it was very early on in the app world, you know, in the history of apps, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of downloads. And so we were all very, you know, self-congratulatory, what a great thing. And then after about a year, and we had a team meeting to evaluate what the experience was. And the average user engagement in those hundreds of thousands of downloads was 3 minutes. So in those hundreds of thousands of people, they'd put it on their phone and then used it for a total of 3 minutes for the next 12 months. So it was very much a plus or minus experience for me personally. It was a great education tool. Wow, people are actually hearing about healthy brain and maybe getting a few important messages. But the idea that having an app on your phone was simply going to change people's behaviour permanently was crazy. And so I became much more motivated to start clinical trials and actually intervening on people's lifestyles, in this case in cognitive training in digital forms, in order to address one of those lifestyle issues, which is lack of mental activity. And so a large part of my group became well known for that. And this all culminated in the Maintain Your Brain trial, which is a very large trial that's now completed. It's over 6,000 people followed for 3 years, and they have been, in an individual way, either undergone dietary intervention or physical exercise intervention or cognitive training or mental health training. And so it's really touching on all of those key lifestyle areas. Now, before we get into the actual trial results, at the beginning planning phase of Maintain Your Brain, because it's a fully digital intervention, online intervention, we used commercially available computer-based cognitive tests, but what was not available was an episodic verbal memory test. So the Ray Auditory is one of the classic verbal memory tests where you learn a set of words over and over again. You see a learning curve, you wait, and then people forget the words. Classic verbal memory test, classically done person to person by a psychologist and the patient. So my group developed Logos, which is a fully automated way of doing the same thing. So over the phone, you hear the list, you repeat the words into the phone, it tells you we're going to call you back in 30 minutes or whatever, and then you do the repeat trial. Critically, because I'll come back to this, before you do the learning test, there's what we call pre-test, where you just hear 3 words, apple, shark, table, repeat them immediately into the phone. It's to make sure the line is good, the person comprehends, they can verbalise. They have to be able to do that to go on to the actual learning trials. So that pre-test has no memory demand. The rest of the trials have memory demand, so just keep that in mind. So the first key part of Logos was an algorithm that could detect which word was being said. We couldn't use commercially available speech recognition because they're very much tuned for natural language, whereas this was just 15 random words. So we developed our own algorithm of very high accuracy to recognise these words, and we developed that algorithm for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different lists of words have all been validated like this. To cut a long story short, Logos performs very well. It correlates to in-person Ray Auditory verbal memory test that averages average test performance when now done in the thousands, mimics very carefully or very similarly classic Ray Auditory verbal memory test results. And we've done it thousands of times, multiple times, during the trial. That last diagram there shows that, as predicted, on average, people's results decline with age, and the higher you are on cognitive reserve, there is a slight advantage in memory. Cognitive reserve there being measured by the LEQ, or Lifetime Experiences Questionnaire. So that questionnaire of cognitive reserve is trying to capture or assess a person's history of being mentally active. So someone like David Attenborough has got very high cognitive reserve. Someone like Pablo Picasso has an incredible off the Richter scale cognitive reserve. So David and myself and Yakov Stern and many others a few years ago published a consensus statement about, well, what is cognitive reserve? And this is really the simple definition. It refers to the brain's functional resilience to stresses like disease, age, and injury. Now, critically, the biggest drain on cognitive reserve is disuse. So if you're not using your brain, your cognitive reserve is falling. If you are challenging your brain, your cognitive reserve is maintained or increases. So the LEQ is kind of our gold standard for measuring cognitive reserve. It's maybe a 20 or 30-minute questionnaire. It's quite detailed. It's been translated into many different languages. One of your colleagues here, Aida Arenzaza Urquillo, led some critical work translating it into different languages, harmonising that work and showing consistency in different populations. So it's a great tool at a clinical or epidemiological level. So then we put these two things together, the Logos auditory verbal memory test and the LEQ, purely out of curiosity. So there was no specific hypothesis we were testing. There was some emerging data that people's voice can sometimes anticipate or predict subsequent dementia in the literature. And so there was really just a background question. Could there be some information in the Logos auditory data that links to cognitive reserve? And so this in the time series is people saying different words in the memory test. You can visualize that in a different way, so you can now look at it in the frequency domain, and you can extract a lot of data. So we were extracting around 250 or 260 features from each one trial, which lasted a few seconds. Now, the first key result is that you can perfectly distinguish between audio that is pre-test, so no memory demand, you're just saying words back, versus audio that is under memory demand. So that's a key first finding, that the speech content is radically different under memory load. Then our machine learning experts, designed this data processing approach or strategy. And I won't go into it, but essentially that raw data features are extracted, they're normalized and I guess adjusted. And then the key question is, can you classify someone's cognitive reserve status, high or low, or high, medium or low, or other classes, purely based on the audio content in Logos? And so the basic fundamental results was, yes, you can, and at a very high accuracy level. So 90% accuracy, you can classify cognitive reserve purely on the audio of Logos trials. We've now shown that that is independent of sociodemographic factors like age or education, or sex, or socioeconomic status, age, native English-speaking ability, and that the effect really is consistent throughout all the phases of the LEQ. So it looks more than anything that there is a speech characteristic that is a trait as opposed to a current feature of cognitive reserve class. So what could that audio characteristic be? before I explain this network diagram, you'll hear someone with high cognitive reserve, someone with low cognitive reserve, and you try and guess which one is which. And make it work.
Fairy fox photo, husband orchid night, egg cushion.
So that was the word list being told back into the phone by one person.
Egg, cushion, husband, woman, lamb, unit, group, photo, fairy.
Right. Another fairy. So, lady number 2, hands up, high cognitive reserve, low cognitive reserve. Come on. Yeah, you're right, David. Very good, very good. So what you may have heard there is what is characterised in this network diagram, which is all 260 features, the correlation matrix with all the other 260 features, and then clustered into modules where those features aggregate distinct from the others. And so at the heart of that characteristic is these features which you can see here, which are around hesitancy, pause length, speed of production, number of hesitations, vary, inflection, these type of features. And so you can see here, again, someone with high cognitive reserve, low cognitive reserve, matched for memory performance. So it's not that these individuals were poor on memory or good at memory. They had the same score. It's that the confidence and the, emphatic nature of that production is very different. And so I think that is linked to the cognitive reserve phenotype, which is very exciting, that we may be able to reduce quite a complex questionnaire into a potentially instantaneous measure of cognitive reserve, which is very relevant to predicting dementia outcomes. And I really want to highlight the amazing machine learning work of Dr. Bina Ahmed from our university. So finally, I'm going to talk about the actual outcomes from Maintain Your Brain trial. So that biomarker was embedded within the Maintain Your Brain related to one of the new outcome measures. But what about the actual trial results? So that's the protocol paper if you're interested in the design. Essentially, as I mentioned, individuals are customised to whether they get physical exercise module, a brain training module, a dietary Mediterranean diet module, or a mental health and well-being module. You had to, and your prescription is dependent on your profile. You had to have at least 2 risk factors to even be on, to get in the door for Maintain Your Brain. So everyone had multiple risk factors. So some people underwent 2 modules, some 3, some 4. So that is the monstrous flow diagram, where at the very beginning we were inviting 100,000 people, something like that, and we ended up with 6,200 randomised people and just over 3,000 with fully complete outcome data at the end of 3 years. So a really major clinical trial. And this is the primary headline results, primary outcomes. The y-axis being the composite cognitive performance. And you can see the so-called coaching group clearly distinguished against the active control group. The active control group received psychoeducation around all of these risk factors, but not intervention. highly statistically significant difference. And what is very pleasing to me is that these curves not only diverge, but they keep diverging after the intense period of training. So the first, let's say, 1 year was intense training. So if you were doing brain training, you were doing it 2 times a week. Plus, if you had a diet module, you're doing that as well 2 times a week. So scheduling was complicated, and that happened in approximately the first year of intervention. Then everyone moved to what we call booster training, where everything now became once a month, with the idea to make it more realistic and feasible in the long term. So in the first year after the first year, which is that second part, the lines are still diverging, which is really very encouraging. And then in the last year, you start to see, the lines falling back towards baseline levels. And it was in that last year, which happened to be in Australia, when the COVID interruption to everything was at its peak, that we saw the real decline in engagement online. So we were tracking engagement very, very carefully. And so really the main message is that for at least that first year after intense dosing, you can still keep people very highly engaged. And then it's a real effort to keep them engaged in the second to third year of follow-up. So the effect size is 0.1 of a standard deviation, which doesn't sound a lot, but if the other major positive trial in the literature to date, which is the finger trial, based in Finland, the effect size was less than a third of that, or about a third of that, of 0.04. So very encouraging that our fully online version of healthy brain lifestyle was leading to a stronger effect than the finger trial, which was in-person lifestyle intervention. And if you extrapolate that back to baseline, that's approximately a 1 year delay before you see cognitive decline in the 2 groups. We're analysing that more as we speak. And so the conceptualisation around the steering committee, so this is a trial really run as a consortium of universities with leading professors in all of these areas, is that a potential 1 year delay in cognitive decline may not be enormously meaningful at the individual level, but at a population level could be really so important. There's a lot of epidemiological modelling showing that if you can delay dementia by 1 year, then that would relate to 10% less number of cases in subsequent years. So potentially of enormous value. And so the final translational question that I've been facing, was faced by the Maintain Your Brain committee, was this is a very important result. We're obviously going to publish, et cetera, but what are we going to do with this technology? At the end of the grant period, which is coming soon, is it just going to be all closed up and move on to the next project? Or do we owe society, which funded this work, something in return? And that was obviously, we all thought very strongly that we need to move Maintain Your Brain from a research project to a product that people can access. And the numbers, of course, astronomical when it comes to ageing around the world, and it's only getting, from a demographic point of view, more urgent, that we need solutions to try and realise healthy brain ageing in the community. And so the committee have agreed to establish a new company. For the moment, it's called Maintain Your Brain Inc., but that's not set in stone. The main point is it's not a not-for-profit. We want Maintain Your Brain to make money, but not for the shareholders, but for the purpose of getting Maintain Your Brain technology to every person on the planet who has access to a phone. That's the pitch for Maintain Your Brain Inc. So as opposed to not-for-profit, it's for purpose. And the for purpose is, as I mentioned, to deliver this evidence-based technology to every person around the world who can access it. So that's why we wanted to make profit, so that we can achieve the ambition. So it's a very different outlook and goal for a company, and that I think is very important for you to recognise that there are different types of commercial outcomes. Skin to Neuron is a for-profit enterprise, and obviously we want to create a new treatment for dementia. Maintain Your Brain is a for-purpose enterprise. We want to make money, but not for shareholders or investors, but to deliver the objective. And this leads me to the impact investment sector. I was having a few quiet drinks last night, and I asked the group, have you ever heard of impact investment? And no one had. And you can ask yourself whether you've ever heard of impact investment. But essentially, it's a movement around the world where investment funds or investors have the choice of putting it into an all-purpose fund where the only objective is to make a return, or impact investment fund where it must make a return and address a social, environmental, or governance good in the community. Now, this impact investment movement is truly huge. So you can see here that impact investment could be public or it could be private. There's impact investment, which is just our marketing device, versus impact investment, where they actually measure, are you achieving the social, environmental, or governance good that you claim, which is the measured impact group up the top. In 1 year, more than $600 billion of research of investment around the world in that measured impact investment movement. This is an incredible amount of funds floating around the world looking for something good to do. What could be that good thing? I've been involved with the World Health Organization now for a number of years, and we are now at the start, or just beyond the start, of the UN decade of healthy aging. We just looked and saw the numbers of people that are entering that age bracket over the next decades. The UN Sustainable Goals, you see number 3 there, is health and well-being. The whole world is rallying around the importance of new health-promoting technology and science and policy. And in my own role, the decade of healthy aging now has specific deliverables and ambitions and goals all around the world, which include preserving and promoting cognitive health. And so I will finish with a question: why would you not be at least engaging and understanding the opportunities in the healthy aging and healthy brain aging space when it comes to your technology? Because I can guarantee you there will be investors out there that want to meet you, want to learn about your research and understand if there is an opportunity for both parties. I won't spend so much time because I think I'm getting to the end of my time period. But really the question of translation of your science outside of academia, you can do the classic business SWOT analysis. S for strengths. The strengths are your brains, the ideas that you're developing each and every day. The strength is you're doing it in somewhere like here, the University of Barcelona, that has the facilities. And more than anything, you're an expert in the method of actually showing people the data. You know, investors always want to see the data. You are the experts of what data matters and how to collect the data, how to interpret the data. That's your value in the ecosystem. The weaknesses is really the same thing. It's your brain, because so many times the attitude is wrong. Probably not here in the audience, but I'm sure there are people out there who think, well, no, commercialization, that's not for me. I'm an academic. I'm going to focus on my science, on the purity of my research. And that's for others to worry about. Well, I can tell you, those others in the university, the tech transfer officers, the lawyers and the legal departments of universities can often actually be part of the problem when it comes to translation. The best person to champion your science is yourself. I can guarantee you of that. Opportunities, I've talked about these opportunities, you know, the social demographic moment that we see ourselves in, the oceans of funds floating around the world looking for good ventures. And, you know, forums like this, there should be venture capital people here today to hear all the exciting work that you're doing. And, you know, why would you not be doing this twice a year and inviting potential investors, philanthropists, impact funds to listen and meet you? At the end of the day, it's about relationships. Sometimes you connect with someone and then it can all go from there. And finally, threats. Every university around the world is struggling with hiring, with retention of staff, filling postdoc vacancies. In Australia, it's been particularly severe because the main cash cow of universities have been Asian students, and for many years that was closed off. And so I think morale is quite low in the university sector. That's very dangerous. My biotech, I have people wanting to join with me, I would say, once a month. Very high quality people. There's a big transfer at the moment of talent from university into the private sector. Wearing my CEO hat, it's fantastic. Wearing my academic hat, I'm very worried about the future, about postdocs and where they see themselves in 5 years' time. And that heart, beating heart of the science sector, which is the postdoc community, needs to be cared for, and real action needs to happen to keep them in the sector, not actual funding, commitment, guarantees, co-matched funding. If they're successful, the university should match that so that there is real financial incentives for postdocs to remain in the university sector. So I'm going to finish there, and I'm going to leave you with an invitation. I have run this Provence workshops now for more than 10 years. It's in a wonderful part of the world, just up the road in Provence. And it's really going to be discussing these type of topics of translation, real-world change. So if you're interested, look it up, and maybe I'll see you in Provence. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. This was a great presentation, fantastic talk, and many information to process, food for thought, but very inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we have now around 15 minutes for questions and discussion. Does anyone someone wants to ask to Michael? I have a question to start with. So, so you told us your experience, which obviously is amazing, in the direction that it flowed from the academic generated knowledge to the companies. then, of course, through that, you get to know the investors and you increase the impact, economical impact of the product and everything. What my question is, what is the return of that for the university? I mean, you're still an academic, and I'm sure that you are not just an academic because you are a professor, you want to keep being a professor, you're still affiliated to the university. So is there a bidirectional return for the university for that? Because I think that if we're saying that the university has no resources, has no public funding, this will be like this, unless this process that you have shown has some return to the university. Otherwise, I don't see how this may be. So perhaps you can elaborate a bit more on that.
I think you're absolutely right, David. I think it has to be mutually beneficial, the relationship, right, between, let's call it, academia and industry at the highest level. It has to be beneficial, and it should be, and I think it's easy to imagine how it can be beneficial. But from a financial model, I think universities are consistently undervaluing what they are providing to the private industry. Like for example, you know, when my company now, Skin to Neuron, acquired the IP for hair follicle precursor cells, I look at it now, it was for a ridiculously low amount. Whereas it should have been valuing that intellectual property properly so that it can then support new postdocs, new facilities, it's really people, what universities need to support more these days. I think it's people and security around that. So I think that is important, that universities need to value their people and their IP in a more market-orientated fashion. And then setting up the relationship. So again, for example, my company is now, because it's expanding, needs to find new lab facilities. It makes no sense whatsoever to just get an empty lab and then fill it with our own equipment and then have to get staff to service that equipment, et cetera, et cetera. You can't afford it. So you need to find a university space that my biotech company can then lease. The smart universities are insisting, yeah, you can get the space, but you need to commit to internships, to training, to helping co-sponsor grants, infrastructure grants, et cetera, et cetera. That's what the smart universities are doing, and more than anything, making it easy. So the legal templates are already there. You know, it's just a matter of coming to agreement between me and you, and then it happens. Not, oh, it's a very good idea, and now it's going to take 12 months to get a contract together. And that's also happened to me, and the opportunity has been lost.
Thank you. Great. Some question?
Thank you, great talk. Can you explain what kind of people actually participated in the study, in the clinical study? So basically, what were the inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria?
Yes, so for Maintain Your Brain, it was 55 to 77-year-olds. They had to have no dementia to begin with, no diagnosed dementia. They had to have access to a computer, digital connection, and at least 2 of these major risk factors for dementia. So they were a risky, let's call them mature age population, but what we saw and what you always see in these type of trials, that they were highly educated, much more highly educated than your average older person. And so that always triggers a question, all right, of how well this data could transfer to the greater population. So we're looking at that very carefully. But otherwise, that was the type of people in the Maintain Your Brain trial.
So I have a related question on that, and that trial. What was the role of the coaches? Because these are coaches that operate online in the trial that you did. These are, in general, what do you think about the role of the coaches? Is mainly to increase adherence? on your trial and in general your opinion, because coaches are everywhere now, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I have a kind of counterintuitive view on coaches because at the start of the trial we were all very adamant that we needed coaches, that all of these modules, you needed human support, even though it's online, to keep adherence as high as possible. And so every module spent a lot of time and effort and resources on coaching. What we saw was that there's really 3 clusters of adherence across all the modules, which is people who are almost perfect, ideal trial participants. They have super high adherence. They never need a coach. And that's about 25%. There is another 25% that enroll in a trial and do nothing. Right? They don't drop out, but they do virtually nothing. And no matter how much contact or coaching you give them, doesn't matter. And so then you've got about a third who are in the grey zone. And maybe that's where coaching could be decisive. But across all the modules, the very high predictor of adherence engagement was just time. There's almost a perfect linear drop-off of engagement. And there were times in the trial where we tried to increase coaching resources. It did not change that line. It was like a law that every 6 months, X percent of people will engage less and less and less. So I'm still not clear in my head with how much coaches actually changes that curve when you start looking over years. I think in short term it's very different, but when you're looking at years of engagement, I think it's really a characteristic of the person which is determining how likely they are to engage in this.
Yeah, and engagement was a measure related to the outcome, right? I mean, was predictive of the improvement in cognitive function, or?
Very little.
Very little, so yeah, okay. Interesting. Someone else has a question?
Here, David.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rector. According to the neuron to skin, which are the biggest barriers that you think that these kind of therapies need to overcome in order to get into the market, hospitals, and treatments?
Oh, that's a big question. You probably understand, to get to market, so to speak, the regulator has to approve the product. To approve the product, it has to go through a series of trials. We're designing our phase 1 trial at the moment, which will be a small trial. If that is successful, you'll need a much larger trial, which could be decisive. Maybe the new medicine would be approved then, or maybe you'd have to do an even third trial. It all depends on what the results are like from a safety point of view and an efficacy point of view. So at a big picture, you've got to do the trials. Specific to cell therapies, the 2 big challenges are manufacturing and delivery. So at the moment, our cells are manufactured by hand. We have a specialist, tissue culture specialist that creates the cells. That's obviously not feasible if this is successful and we need to treat hundreds of thousands of people around the world. So we are very deep in the process of automating the production, so using robotic microfluidic systems to manufacture. Delivery is about changing practice of medicine. So at the moment, there are around 1 million knee replacement surgeries in the US every year. 20 years ago, it was hardly any. So in the future, if this is successful, it will change the practice of neurosurgery and will become a routine practice and therefore be accessible.
Thanks.
Because there are some online questions.
Oh,
I see
okay.
that, but I don't see the chat that she was saying. I can't find it.
Maybe someone can read them out.
Thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful. I have a question. If I've understood well, you commented that the speech has some predictive value of cognitive decline. And I wanted to know if you have analyzed the data of your trial stratifying the population based on some speech markers.
Yeah, brilliant question. We're very much, that's in our agenda, is to look at that. So just to clarify, the speech biomarker was as a predictor of cognitive reserve class, high, medium, or low, which in and of itself is a very strong predictor of future cognitive decline, future dementia risk. Your question as to whether the same biomarker predicts a therapeutic response to maintain your brain is something that, yeah, we're planning to look at. Those outcomes are very fresh. They're weeks old. So lots and lots of work in the future to do. And I should mention that the whole Maintain Your Brain database is going to be put into a publicly accessible repository in the next 12 months in the kind of ADNI style, so that potentially anyone here in the future will be able to analyse their own questions so to get the most out of that very important trial.
There was another question here in the room, I think.
I have two very basic questions.
Where are you?
Here.
Ah, good.
Not going into the industry side. You presented a cell or two images of the hippocampus that showed the cell that's nicely integrated with dendrites and spines, and then the new neurons on the hippocampus. I was wondering two things. The first is do the projections of these neurons, the axon, actually go to the correct places? And the second one is, are there other structures that you have tested where the integration is happens so nicely, or is just the hippocampus?
Yeah, very good question. So we've only looked at dendritic branching, not axonal branching, as you mentioned. So that's something we need to understand. The other question is that our technology has now advanced to the stage of being able to not just potentially treat the hippocampus, but we can in vitro differentiate the cells down a dopamine pathway so that they become dopaminergic neurons in vitro, and therefore use as the basis for treatment of Parkinson's disease. And so we're about to launch Parkinson's animal models using cells with dopamine expression to answer that very question, is can you treat other brain areas in a more specialized way?
Okay. Thank you very much for all your questions.
Pleasure. Thank you.